I was born in 1931, but my earliest memory as a child, probably I was 6 years old when my oldest sister, Verna, was married. I was the flower girl. I believe I was approximately 6 years old.
Well, I think about the first thing I recall was they were building a road by the house, and they didn't have anywhere to keep the team, and they rented Papa's barn to keep the team. And one Sunday morning, bright and early, there's a white horse drove up at the house. We were staying in Southport going to school, and there's a colored guy drove up on a white horse telling us that the barn had burnt down. And I was born in 19, and I don't recall what age I was at that time.
Well, the first thing I remember when I was about 6 years old was going to my first school. And we had to walk about 5 miles, and we had to go through just regular old mud.
Cart trails.
Cart trails. And there, and in the wintertime, you had to jump from tussock to tussock to keep from getting your feet wet, but you always got it wet. And when we got to the schoolhouse, we had an old pot-bellied stove that we could sit down and pull our shoes off in socks and try to kind of dry them. And it was just a one-room schoolhouse with one teacher with all grades in it.
Up to 7.
What?
It covered from 1st to 7th grade.
Covered from the 1st to the 7th grade. And that was my first memory.
Well, living on a farm, we had a lot of animals. We've had horses, mules, cows, chickens, turkeys, hogs. I can even remember sheep. I don't remember goats, but somebody in the neighborhood had them.
Naturally, we had every kind of an animal that you would need around the farm, and I also had 2 or 3 goats just to play with. But the main thing that I was involved in is in clearing up a farm. We had these cattle, it was about 300, and they would live off of the marsh grass on the seashore during the winter, and in the spring they would drive them back out to the savannas on the farm, and we'd burn off the savannas, and they would come out with tender green grass, and the cows would feed on it. And we would pin them up at night, and we'd fence in a place about 2 acres with rail fence. But prior to that, we had an old stump puller. We'd pull the stumps out, and a lot of the roots would remain in the ground. And we'd haul litter and stuff, pine straw, into the area, and when we pinned the cows there, they would stomp it in, and so doing, they would stomp up the roots. And whenever we got the ground soft enough, we'd move the fence and continue the same thing. And then we'd pick up the old roots and things that they'd stomped up and burn them. And that's mostly how we cleared the biggest part of the farm.
The only other thing that I can remember that we had that they haven't named is guineas.
That's right.
I don't know how they got it, but that was a sight. We had many guineas, and I can't describe the noise they made around the house. But Mother would cook sometime too, but there was dark meat, and it didn't go over too much with us, but if you got real hungry for food and that's all you had, you'd eat it. That's the only thing that they haven't told about.
Did you eat guinea eggs?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
we had the guinea eggs also. There was more than the average egg.
There were no difference in taste in chicken eggs. And taking the guinea eggs out of the nest, you had to use a spoon. Because if you used your hand, the guinea would not lay there no more. They'd go somewhere else and build a nest.
We had tobacco, corn, peanuts, and oh, I hated peanuts. Had to hoe those long rows. And I remember cotton. Watermelons.
Well, we had all kinds of vegetables that it would take to survive. That's what we mostly dealt with. Had sweet potatoes
Oh yeah.
and not back prior to Julia's time. We didn't grow tobacco. I think she came along about the time whenever we started growing tobacco. It was mostly corn and sweet potatoes and peanuts, and we used the peanuts to fatten the hogs, and the tops of them went to hay, so we used every bit of the peanuts.
Well, I remember that most everything we ate come off the farm, and the corn would grind it and make meal, and grits. And I remember one time when we had, well, this was during the Depression. We didn't have anything to eat, no bread of any kind, and Mama went out in the field and pulled some corn that was ready to pull, and brought it to the house and shucked it and cut it off the cobs and baked it, and that's the best cornbread I've ever had. And just about everything we had, except staple groceries, come off the farm.
Now, the only thing that I guess you could say we sold off of the farm was like when you raise hogs, you would sell what you didn't use for your own self, you would sell. And then we'd kill a cow once in a while, to supplement us in the meat. And then we did a lot of hunting, like for squirrels and anything that you might find in the woods that was wild. The reason that they used peanuts for fattening hogs, it made a different grade of meat. It was much sweeter meat than it would if it had come from corn.
My brother and I used to play in the woods an awful lot when we wasn't working. We'd climb pine trees, and some of them were so small the tops would pop right out of them. We'd get a hold of the top and swing down to the dirt, and they'd pop out. We also had a place we called the sand hole, and we'd let each other bury you. One would bury the other. Of course, we'd leave our face out, but we thought that was a lot of fun. And we played under the house on rainy days with medicine bottles. That was our cards. And we'd fix us a road, and we'd travel up the roads with our medicine bottles, and we'd picked under the house to do this because it would be dry when it was raining. We couldn't do anything else. I remember my first doll. I think I was approximately 10 years old, maybe. And I got a bicycle when I was about 15. Not a whole lot of bought toys. We played with anything make-believe. We made make-believe that it was our vehicles, and we'd go up in the barn and play in the hay too. Roll the hay back, hunt peanuts.
About the first thing that I had to play with when I got up large enough was just rolling a tire along. And I expect I've rolled a tire about as far as anybody. Then I kind of graduated into taking a stick and driving a nail in it and rolling a metal wheel around. And as time went on, we when we found time enough, we'd come to the seashore to play around in the river, fish, clam, oyster, and whatnot. To me, there wasn't much time for playing. It was all doing.
Well, first toys I can think of now is paper dolls, cutting them out the catalogs. It's mostly seasonal about catalog. And playing dollhouse with them. And also on Sunday afternoons when if there was any young people at all could be got around, we would walk down the road and go under a good shade tree and sit down and talk and joke all the evening away. And that's most of what we did on Sundays, after we got out of church and Sunday school. We made a ball to play outside. We got a tree limb of that, and we take a cord and material of anything and keep winding it around and around to make a ball. And we play ball with that. And we used to sew doll clothes, cut them out ourselves and make it. Well, they looked good to us though, because that was all we didn't know anything else, so it was wonderful. But we didn't have very many things to play with. But we did have a crowd of a big family of black people that lived over on the hill. And they did a lot of work for us in fields. And another thing, we would play with them also. And there was a good crowd of them, but we never did have a fuss with them or a fight. I never remember having any words or anything at all. They were a wonderful crowd of people. And everybody was going to smoke a cigarette. Well, I stuck that cigarette in my mouth and took 2-3 puffs. Buddy, it made me as sick. I have never tried another cigarette. I also tried Mama's.
No.
I don't think is he recording it now?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I also took a dose of Mama's snuff, a dip of Mama's snuff. She sent me to Aunt Cal's to borrow some snuff. And well, she'd warned us about not taking it, but when I was coming back, and I took a dose, and when I went by the cornfield coming back to the house, I got so sick I couldn't stand it, and I had to lay over in the corn patch until I got over it. But I have never tried any more cigarettes or any more snuff.
You see, we punished our own self.
Yeah, I got my punishment.
Yeah, on the farm we needed lime and so the way we got our lime, we ate a lot of oysters living close to the coast, and Daddy would make a pen with logs, put logs for the floor, and he'd fill that pen with oyster shells, and then up underneath he would build a fire and burn all those shells and poles and all down, and it would be lime. Then he would spread the lime out over the fields that he used to plant his corn and peanuts and garden and all. That was the way we got lime.
Whenever we didn't have anything else to do, we'd always find something. And one of them was building tar kilns and burning them. And we'd go out on the slant of a hill and shovel off the top soil down to the sort of the clay, and there we'd fill it full of straw. And then we'd go to the woods and we'd find these lightwood trees, and we'd split them up and place them in the tar kiln. And after we filled it up, we would put more straw on top of it and throw dirt on top of it. And right down to the lowest point, there would be a hole dug. And we'd punch a hole from that hole to the tar kiln. And then we'd go to the top of the tar kiln and set it afire, and it never would flame, it would just smother, and it was as it burned on down, the tar would run out of the wood and would run down to that hole and go into the hole. Then we would dip it up from the hole into barrels and cap it and carry it to Wilmington and sell it. Well, we had some cotton, but the problem with our cotton was it would all go to stalk and it wouldn't produce much cotton. And then as tobacco came into play, we started growing tobacco, and that was something that practically every farmer did, was have a little tobacco patch. After the hog killings, we'd take all the scraps and things and put them in a pot and add lime and ashes to it and cook it. Yes, and lye. And cook it until it all settled to just look like a big pudding. It'd be the same color. And after it could chill down, you could go and cut it out like if it was a cake, and it would look good enough to eat. And that's what we use mostly for washing with.
You wash yourself and the clothes with it?
That's right. I've used it as a soap for washing with.
Well, when I got big enough to work, and even before, I was sick mostly all the time. I didn't do a whole lot of work, but I've hoed tobacco, set out tobacco, prepared the tobacco to go in the barns to be cured. I've suckered corn, hoed peanuts. I picked cotton. And done a lot of washing dishes.
Did you think it was hard work?
Yes, the hardest work you could do is a farmer's daughter. Being a farmer's daughter is about the hardest work you could got. For the men too, it wasn't easy. If I could have done it in the shade, it wouldn't have been quite as bad. But being in the hot sun made it harder.
I think the hardest work that I was encountered with is gathering tobacco. When you start out, you're gathering little sand lugs, which is the bottom leaves, and you're standing on your head all day long, and you load it onto what we call a truck. That was a sled pulled by a horse, and you carry it to the barn, and they string it there. And then after the men in the field get through priming the tobacco, they come to the barn and hang it up into the barn. And it's always pretty hot. And if you haven't eaten lately, you'll get weak in a hurry.
The hardest job I've ever done on the farm was stripping fodder. We had a lot of corn and long rows, and you'd go out and strip the leaves off of it, and then take another leaf and wrap around it, and then hang it up behind the corn. And that was the hottest time of the year and the hottest time of weather that you'd had. And one time, I felt like I was going to pass out, so I played like that I just couldn't stand it. I had to go home. And my daddy says, keep on at it. You're not going to get hurt. But that is the worst job I ever done. And then, as we grew a little older than that, I had an older sister, and we took turnabout cooking and staying to the house because my mother'd rather go in the farm, out on the farm and work than to stay at the house. So we took every other week of doing the cooking and the cleaning house and whatever we have to do. But there was always something for us to do. But that stripping fodder is something I never want to see no more. Well, in our family we had 9 children, and there was 5 boys and 4 girls. And the third one was, I think it was 2 years old when he died with pneumonia, is what I understand. And then we had was 4 boys and 4 girls in our family. And my mother loved the outside, and she'd rather go out in the fields and work with my daddy than to stay at the house and do the work there. So when we got old enough that we could even hardly get old enough to put a pot on the stove to cook, Mama had us in there cooking, one of us every other week, and she would go out and do that, and she liked it better, but that was too strong for her, too heavy for her to do because her health was not good. And she had a child about every 3 years. It just wore her out.
Various things, according to what it was. If it was for a boil, carbuncle, she'd take a yolk of an egg and put it on a post cloth and put it on the carbuncle to draw it to a head. And
Fat meat she did put to use that too on the same way.
yes, they use fat meat. And one of the, I guess, the main things was coal oil. Anytime anyone got hurt or sprained the foot or something, they would rub it in coal oil.
And then we did have Vicks at that time.
I remember one time I was going into the woods to put down some feed to the hogs, and I carried the gun with me. And my brother had just shot a deer prior to that, and the dog was running off in the bay, and I stopped the mule and got out and got my gun ready, and the dog quit barking. So being young, I think I was about 12 years old, I picked the gun up to get back in the wagon, and I did. I pulled the trigger, and the load of buckshot went right between my toes.
I remember that.
And on my way home, I stopped at this old lady's house, and she said, "Lord God, child, let me get something put on it." And that's what she got, was kerosene to pour on it.
Turpentine is good too for stick a nail, but you'd always make a smoke out of wool and not let it blaze, but keep it smoking. And if wherever you stuck that nail, you hold over that smoke, and it would cause the poison to come out. And turpentine was used later to take the soreness out. And clay and vinegar mixed together, make a poultice, was good for springs. You spring your ankle, that's what you'd get, a poultice around your ankle, and stay off your foot.
We didn't have any doctors at all, hardly. There was one doctor in the county, as I recall, named Dr. Doja, and the hospital at Southport was named after him. And if you needed him, you had to wait till your turn come, because he wasn't available anytime that you needed him. And I recall one time my brother, who was younger, was very sick, and he was in bed almost unconscious, and he just wouldn't notice anything. And we had got the word out to the doctor to stop by at his first chance. And when he came by, he looked at him and wanted to know where my dad was at. And mother told him he was in the field. And he said, "Well, send a child after him." So I went and got him. And when I got there, he was explaining to him that he wasn't for sure what he had, but he was he was gonna die if there wasn't something done, and if he did the wrong thing, he was gonna die. And I don't recall what was the problem, but Papa agreed with him to go ahead and treat him. And he got his needle out, and he had a point on about 6 inches long, and gave him a shot in his back. And before we went to bed that night, he was he was noticing things. And then we had a county nurse, Miss Holliday, who would come to us and help us in any way we could when we needed her. And other than that, I don't recall any other doctors or medical treatment you could get unless you went to, I don't even think it had a hospital at first.
Well, we usually eat what we wanted. If we didn't want it, we just didn't eat it. But my favorite was butter beans and okra and biscuit. Love biscuit. Of course, we had anything that you could raise on the farm, collards, and made our own meal and made our own grits, carrot to the mill and have it fixed in grits on meal. But I love butter beans, and today I still love butter beans. But and I love
Tomatoes.
I love tomatoes too, and fresh backbone. Daddy would salt the backbone down and then let it stay a few days and take it up and wash it good, and Mom would cook some of that and cook some rice in the broth, and boy, that was something good. And Lord, I loved everything though. I still do. Back then we had a county, what would you call her?
Home demonstration.
Home demonstration lady that would go around to anybody that was interested in to their homes to show them how to can, how to preserve their food so it would last longer. And of course, we always butchered our own hogs and salted it and hung it up and smoked it with hickory. And but she would come out and show us how to can our vegetables. And at that time, there was a pressure cooker come out, and you would pressurize your jars of food and cook it so many minutes. And Mom used to can backbone that way. She would take her extra sausage and fry it and put it in big jars and pack, and once she'd fry it and put it in the jars, she would pour the grease from the sausage over the top of it and put a lid on it. And you could keep it that way for a good while. And she would can her spare ribs, put those in jars, can those. And well, at that time, they were using the pressure cooker to can lots of meat that they didn't have before, and that caused us to have food longer in the year than we normally did. We could keep it longer because ice was just almost unreal. Occasionally you might get a 50-pound block of ice in a little open ice box with a little door to it, and she always used that to keep her milk and things that would spoil so easy.
That was in your day.
Yeah, that was in my day.
We used to put our milk in jugs and put it down in we had a well.
Yeah, that too.
And put it down in the well to keep it. And then I have known of them digging a big hole and buying ice and putting it down in the dirt, and that would keep it a good long time, the ice. It wouldn't melt as bad. Other than that, so far as I'm concerned, butter beans and cornbread and sliced tomatoes and okra is the best food on the farm.
Still is.
Yes.
Well, I don't ever remember culling anything. If it's digestible, we ate it. We didn't complain. And the biggest trouble is some getting to the table ahead of the others. If you was left on the end, you didn't get much. Uh, I don't know if this is the right time to mention it, but I've seen them prepare beef tripe and hog chitlins,
And we had our own eggs.
and there just nothing was thrown away if it was edible. And whenever I was young, not too old, I imagine I was about 12 or 10 somewhere or another, we were snaking logs out of a swamp, and we were using an oxen to do it with, and sometimes the old ox would just bury down to his stomach. He'd bog down, and he just sat there just as contented like there was nothing to it. And we'd unhitch from him and take some hay and put off to the side where the ground was solid, and then he'd work himself out. But a horse is not very good for anything like that. When they begin to mar down, they get upset and they start twisting and turning, trying to act up. And a mule is a little bit better, but an old ox, he never gets excited. He just takes his way and keeps it. And he's web-foot, and he don't sink as bad as nothing. That's one of the hurtingest things that I ever had. He stepped on my foot one day. I was barefooted, and he carried it right on down for a foot or two before I got him off. And it bothered me for several years afterwards. There was a lot of sheep over on Baldhead Island, and the wild hogs too. And my dad got the idea that he would like to have some. So we got several people together and got a shrimp boat to carry us across over there. And we caught about 15, I guess. And we had them tied sort of like hogs, like tying a hog with the feet tied together. And then we had to find a way to get them back across. So one day we found there's a shrimper up in the creek, and we hollered to him, and he came to us, and we asked him if he'd carry a sheep back across for us. And he said he would, and he was pulling a rowboat behind the shrimp boat, and we had some in the shrimp boat and some in the rowboat. And coming back across Cape Fear, it got so rough until one of the sheep rolled out. And it was always bothered me to know that sheep drowned, tied his feet tied together. We several ways that we work the salt waters. We use oysters and clams, and then also fish, and we would flounder at night with gigs. And back in those days, we didn't have the lights like they have today. We would take an old rim off of a cart and squeeze it together and make a sort of a handle, and then on the other end we'd weave it with wire, and we'd get fat lightwood and build a fire on it and lay it across the boat, and we'd have gigs and we'd push our boat along, and you could see fairly good but not too well, and that's the way we caught the flounders at night. And then we have nets that we'd put across to catch the tide high, and we put the net across the creek at the mouth, and when the tide fall out, all the fish in the creek would settle in that net. And then we had fishers on the beach in the fall where the fish was migrating south, like mullets and spots and anything. It was coming down the coast, and we'd put the net about a 45 degree out into the water, reaching about a mile, and let it sit for about 8 hours, and then we go back and get the outer end and pull it ashore. And we'd try to do that whenever the water was high water. So whenever the tide would fall out, we'd have the net pulled as far on the banks as we could, and the tide would fall out and leave it on the bank. And then those fish we would dress, or either just gut them and head them and pack them in salt in barrels and sell them like that, or either we would take them home and keep them to eat to the next year.
Gosh, knows it.
Behind our house, on Sunday mornings, we always went to church on Sunday mornings unless it was raining or something that wasn't able to go. But a lot of times we'd get up and get ready, and behind the house there was cart trails that run all the way to that church through the savannah. And it was muddy and wet and boggy and everything else, but we still went. And then sometimes we would take the cart, the mule cart, and drive it and until we got pretty near the church, and then we'd tie him to a tree and leave him there until after church services and go back. And then a lot of times we walked that 6 miles or so all the way down the road. That's how far we'd have to walk to get to the church. But we went to church.
All I can recall is it was Sunday school every Sunday morning, and some services at night. But I don't recall Wednesday nights. It was just Sunday and Sunday night to begin with, and later on they came in with Wednesday night classes.
Well, I don't believe I went to church as much as the older children did.
That was mostly before our time.
Daddy was turned out the church due to this. Now, I heard that he was working, and back then if you missed so many conferences, they'd just turn you out the church. And he missed that amount. So they turned him out the church, and he never did go back as much as he did do in his younger days.
That was on the fishing beach thing.
From what I hear, it was from the reason he didn't go. He was out fishing to have food.
The first 2 times, and the next time he broke down.
And one time he broke down, and he was someplace and broke down, couldn't get there. But they were very strict. If you didn't go to those conferences, and he was Sunday school superintendent, and he did a lot in the church. But turning him out the church, I don't think was good for him, because he never wanted to go back anymore. So I was the last one, and I didn't go like the others did. I guess maybe back then people thought that was the right thing to do, would be turn them out the church. But really, I don't feel like they should have done it. It really caused some difference in Dad's life. He never ever felt like he should, since it was the members of the church that turned him out, that he should go back. So he did go back some, but never as much. And there was one man in the church that played a big part, and I don't like to call any names, but my daddy felt hard at him the rest of his life, I believe. I've heard him speak about it, and he certainly didn't approve. He didn't think that was a right thing to do to anybody.
Kind of one-man dictatorship.
One person was kind of running the church, but then I guess that went for all members of the church. If you were not there when you were supposed to, and you failed to get there so many times, then...
But now, so far as finding them rules in the Bible,
no, you don't find
they're
such
not in
rules
there.
as that in the Bible. That was made up
man-made
by the church.
The first week he was fishing, and there was a truckload of them. That's the way they went, on his truck down to the beach. The second time he fished, But the third time, he told them all to be ready because they were going to church. They all got ready and got on the truck, and on the way there, the truck broke down. And they just couldn't get there. And that's why they turned them out of the church, because they didn't come them 3 times.
That's another thing. It's always been a curiosity to me. He never did take the time to tell us about his people or who was who or nothing.
No.
He didn't discuss nothing like that with us. The one thing that stood out with me was I've never seen him doing any manual work. He was always riding a horse with his suit on, a black hat, and a white shirt and a tie.
He must have been a preacher.
And every time I ever seen him, it was that condition. That's all I recall about him.
Well, I remember my grandfather, but I don't remember anything else about him. He was a tall man, slim.
Or a mustache.
I remember seeing my grandmother sitting in a rocking chair, and he was there with her. And that's about, but any issue I don't remember.
We'd go into the woods and we'd find a bee tree,
Yeah,
and we'd stop up the hole where they worked out of, and we'd saw it down and take the log cart and bring it home and ling it up and let the bees start working at it. Then we'd build hives, and the bees, when they swarm, we'd put them in those hives, and we would have sometimes it's a 55-gallon barrel almost full of honey, and as we used it, it would turn to sugar, and long at the last, whenever it got old enough, that's what it was sugar.
It would turn back to sugar.
And Mama would use it to make different kind of cakes and cookies and things with. And that, to me, that was one of the main source of sugar. Now there was sugar on the market, and they bought sugar at times.
well, we grew sugar cane
I don't remember that.
and cut it and carried it someplace. I believe it was down at Supply. And I didn't never see how they done it, but they got the sugar out of that sugar cane.
They squeezed the juice from the cane, and then they cooked the cane. They cooked the juice, and you have syrup. You have to cook it.
That was
You
our
got to
syrup.
know what you're doing when you cook that juice, and stop at the right time, or you're gonna have sugar. It'll turn into sugar eventually if you cook it too much.
We just about made all of our living right there on the farm, except clothes. But our clothes, we were very lax, and I had to take strings and tie my shoes on to go to school. And that was a very bad thing. So if we had the clothes, we wouldn't have been too bad off. Well, we had BYPU on Sunday nights at the church, and all young people anywhere close to the church was there. So we had a pretty good crowd of young people. So one night we had BYPU, and the young people wasn't ready to leave and go home. They wanted to stay and have fun together, be with the crowd. So Mr. Carl Ward was one of the deacons in our church, and he was a very good man. So he left and went on home, and we stayed. And we turned the lights out in the church. I don't know who done it, but I was in the crowd. And he got home and waited, and his children didn't come home either. His children was there too. And so he turned around and went back to the church and turned the lights on, and boy, you never heard such a holler in all your life. It was, well, it just excited everybody to death. But there was no harm in it. And but he come in just as nice and kind as you've ever seen in your life. He was not a man to get flighty or a man to fly off a hook or any kind. And said, boys and girls, I thought we were through with our lesson. And nobody would say anything. And he says, don't you think it's time we go home? Everybody got up and went home. There was nothing said. Boy, there was some embarrassed children there. That was many years ago. That was when I was real young. And that was, I'll never forget it. But Mr. Carl Ward he won't never forget it either, I'm sure, and nobody else that was in that church. But he handled it so good. Nobody could get mad with him. He didn't say nothing. But now that's many years ago, so we wasn't angels then either.
But we would always buy seed
That's what it is.
in the hulls, and we'd buy quite a lot of them. Sometimes it'd be 45 or 50 bushels.
Peanuts.
And we'd have to, peanuts, yes. And we'd have to shell them. And sometimes we would carry part of them to other people and have them to shell them. And sometimes we'd have pea poppins in the home and shell peanuts a while. And after so long, we'd push everything aside, and then they'd have a square dance. And they'd always have musicians there, people who played various instruments, and someone who called the figures to dance by. And that was, I guess, the main consent of the pea popping.
But it was always a good time. You'd pop peas if you were going to get square dance. Well, now that was just a good time for the young people to have something to do at home. And they'd invite the young people around as far as they could that could get there. And Mom and Papa would have a syrup and the stuff to boil to make you had one at one end, one at the other. You'd make the syrup and you'd cook it until it got to a certain stage. And then you had butter to put on your hands, and you'd take it out in a platter and keep rolling it till you got to the place that you could take it, get it out, and one at one end and one at the other, and you would cross it, pulling, that candy. And you pull and pull and pull it until it turned white. And then it was time to lay it down and break it up. And that was just a good time getting together. And it was a lot of fun, and we did enjoy that. And it was nothing that I know of except it extract, that has some extract in it, whatever you want to put in it, and sugar, and water. I don't know of anything else, do you?
Right.
And it makes the prettiest white candy.
Yeah, I can remember Christmas, celebrating Christmas. Mostly, as I was younger, what we got was candy and fruit. That's mostly what we got. But Mom would always make plenty of sweets, cakes, and pies, and those coconut pies sure were good.
Nobody's ever made any better.
And the first time I ever remember seeing Santa Claus, doesn't look like our Santa Claus today, but I believe it was Mr. Peyton McKiffin.
What did he look like?
He was wearing overalls, best I can remember, but we were so excited because they said he was Santa Claus. And
I don't remember.
that's the first time I ever remember seeing Santa Claus. He had overalls on. I don't remember that he had a disguised face. Well, I didn't know it was him, so it had to be disguised somehow. And of course, his you got a little older, we could afford a little more at Christmas. So that made, as kids, a much better Christmas for us. But first bicycle I ever got, I thought I was a queen. I just thought I had it all took care of. And my brother and I got one together, and we run the wheels off of it, and I learned how to ride in the ditch, the highway ditch. That way, if you fell, you could catch on the side of the ditch. That's the way I learned how to ride a bicycle. And back then, they were beginning to pave the road with tar, and you just couldn't ride on that until it got hard. But I rode a mile up the ditch.
Well, I can recall wanting a bicycle, and it got close to Christmas time, and the closer it got, the more I talked. And I thought I was gonna get it.
Was Santa Claus gonna bring it, or?
Yes, that was the thought. And the Christmas night, I dreamed of getting it. And the next morning I got up and I didn't have it. And I was about the most let down person you ever seen. Other than that, most of what we got was fruits and nuts. And that was mostly from Werner and Cleo working in town, and they would bring things to us. They were away from home then and was working in town, and they would bring, sometimes on weekends prior to Christmas, they'd bring us candy and stuff, and that was something we never did get. The kids back those days
Really didn't expect
didn't get everything they wanted.
everything.
So your disappointment didn't last too long.
Well, I never did get a bicycle. I did without, I think when I got a pretty good sized boy, I found somebody that had an old used ones. I talked him out of.
Well, the biggest Christmas that I can remember was when I got it for Christmas. Other than apples and oranges and fruit and nuts, I got a pair of beads. And I thought they were the prettiest things I'd ever seen. That was the most excitement. Never had anything like that. And I never have forgotten it either. But that was my most exciting time. But as the years went on, that was 81 years ago. That's a long time.
So you were how old when you got your beads?
Well, I was old enough to know I was about 6, 7 years old then. And that was a great day. I was surprised we had never got anything like that before. And they were in a box all wrapped up for Christmas.
So Christmas was the time that you didn't really expect a lot, so if you got anything,
If you got a
that was
surprise,
particularly
it was really a surprise.
exciting.
Well, it was fun.
And we always had plenty of food though on Christmas. Always.
Well, we
Mama
never
made
starved.
sure of that.
So there was a
We
lot of
always
eating
had-
at Christmas.
It's sweets and all, and I won't ever forget her bread pudding. It was
Still
so
love it.
good.
Just on Christmas?
No, she would have bread pudding a lot through the year, but the special thing at Christmas was her coconut pies.
That's right.
They were delicious.
And one of the things that was in your stocking for Christmas was raisins.
Yes.
And they'd always come on the like they was picked off the vine, on the stem. Raisin and orange and apple.
Well, I can remember a lot about the Depression, but I still don't think we had anything like the people that didn't have a farm had. We had everything on the farm. You could live anything that you wanted. If you wanted a hog, you could have pork. Anything else, and we had about everything you could think of on the farm. So
we had,
food,
so far as the food line,
yeah,
but nothing to wear. And you didn't have no money, but even
that's
to
right.
the products you was growing on the farm, you was having a problem with it. It was awful dry. It was the bugs would just eat your corn and crops up, arch potatoes and whatnot. And that was during the time whenever they had the droughts in Texas, and they shipped all the cows out of Texas, and a lot of them landed here in the green swamp. And when we lived in Newport, there was still some in the woods and the swamps up there. And I don't know whatever happened to them. I guess they just faded away because they're so far back into the woods you couldn't reach them. But in those days, they'd have a dust storm out west, and you could see the effects of it here. You could see the elements was right dusty. So far as surviving, we were surviving, but we didn't have anything to make us live beyond survival hardly. It's just existence.
Did you know that there were people starving in cities?
Oh yeah, yes sir. And back in those days, WPA began to operate, in the early 30s, and people was relying on the WPA to live, to make a living.
So you did know there was depression going on?
Oh yeah, we knew it was rougher than what it had been. See, this all started along about 29. That's when the banks went busted, and when the banks went down, that's when everything stopped. There's no money in circulation, and about the only advantage a person had on the farm was he could grow his food. He could get his food, but he didn't have anything else to do with. And the people in the city, they were didn't have any money, and WPA helped them stay alive. There's certain things that we didn't have, like soap. We didn't have that, and we had to make our soap. And the soap is pretty strong. It would almost eat your skin up. It had so much lye in it. And our clothes, we'd have to, I know I've had to piece my galluses on my overalls, and to where I could make them long enough to make out with them. I'd outgrow them, and sometimes the leg would come up to my knees almost. But you had to do with that, you see. That was caused from Depression days.
Put pasteboard in the bottom of your shoes.
Oh, I've taken wire and punched holes around my soles, trying to sew where they come loose on my shoes, trying to tie the sole to my shoe. And on one occasion, I had my shoe wired up, and I was crossing my legs in the schoolroom, sitting in the desk, and my foot with that wire in it happened to strike somebody's butt in front of me, and they hollered, and I got a whipping for it.
And the staple groceries that we couldn't get off the farm, he'd go down there with his list, and he'd get it, and what's his name?
Floyd Kirby.
Mr. Kirby, yeah, Floyd Kirby. And he'd fill out that list and give it to him, and he never charged him nothing. He put it on the books. And it went on through the whole Depression. Never a bill did he ever get. And at the end of the Depression, when Papa began to get work to do and make a little money, he was the first man that he went to pay off. That come first. But I'll always appreciate Mr. Kirby and always love him because of that one thing. He trusted him, and that got us through. The things that we couldn't, make off the farm. I think he started getting some soap down there too.
Back then, everybody had to help everybody. You couldn't hardly survive unless you did work together and try to help each other. Daddy used to swap help. Some of us would help somebody else, and they in return would let their children come help us to get the crop gathered.
Papa had got a contract with the county to build that road from 211 to over to the beach, Long Beach. And
That's where I
so
got
doing, he bought several trucks, Model Ts. And on part of the job, and he used the trucks where he was putting a field over the marsh. And on occasions, they'd run into a place in the marsh where it didn't have no bottom. He just keep dumping dirt and dumping dirt, and after a while you'd see it spew up about 60 foot over there, come up out of the mud right fresh. Well, they'd cram trees and bushes and stuff in there and dump more dirt in, and finally they would get it to hold. And I know one place there was an old gator that had a nest, and boy, she would fight you to know not one if you fool around her nest a little bit. And then after you got out of the marsh, they used mules with scoops to build fields and things with. And I don't know whether this is appropriate to say this or not, but we stopped for dinner one time, and this old mule who was pulling a double scoop laid down during dinner time, and we couldn't get him up when we went back to work. And one of the guys got a handful of straw and set it afire and stuck it under his tail. Well, that was the prettiest fireworks you ever seen. You can't say gas won't burn. The way they loaded the trucks there, they were using prisoners, and some of them was in ball and chains to shovel the dirt onto the trucks. He didn't have no education, but you couldn't fool him. He could walk up to a tree and tell you just how much lumber was in that tree. He could figure a house as to how much lumber it would take. But so far as an education, I think he said he went to the 3rd grade.
He got a good check from whoever it was paying off. I think it was the state. And he came home from Southport where he had been to get his check, and when he got it, he deposited it. And he came home, boy, he was happy. He was thrilled to death. That whole depression was worth it all. And so he said there was something wrong, though. He knew something was wrong. He says, that is not right. It can't be. So then in about a week, he was out in the field plowing, and here come the bank people. They come to the house and asked where he was. And we told them he was down in the field. So they had to go out there and get off their cars and walk through that field because he was at the other end, and them was long rows. I know they got dirty. And when he saw him coming, he knew what it was. And they come out and told him, he says, Mr. Smith, there's not a thing we can do for what we're out here. We cannot make you do anything. But if you don't do it, the bank's going to break. And the bank did break one. I don't know what was right
That
then.
was during the Depression.
Okay. And he told them where the mistake was. And Papa told him he knew that they had made a mistake. He knew they'd be back out there because it couldn't have been what it was. And it was a lot over what his check was supposed to be. And he says, and I'll give it back to you. I'll put it back in the bank. And when they figure it out and tell them what the real check, what the real stuff was. And they did, and he give it back to them. But he could have kept all of it. But when I was 18 years old, I graduated from high school. And about 2 weeks after that, I was on my way to Wilmington to start my life working, making my living. And I had to first find a place to stay. And I met up with this boarding home. She only had 2 boarders, and that was a girlfriend of mine and myself. But we got our room and board for $2.50 a week. And she even fixed our lunch. And she did our laundry. I was making $5 a week. So I had $2.50 of my own. Well, to start with, I went down to the post office and started me a savings account.
Bank.
No, it was just a
Post office?
Yes.
Didn't know you done that. I hadn't never
Well, you
heard
did
that one.
then.
Okay.
And so every week I'd put part of that $2.50 after I paid my room and board and everything else. But our landlady did everything else. We had no other expense except give her $2.50. And I kept doing that. And then Roosevelt went in. To me, the greatest man that's ever been president of our country. He raised our salary to $7.50. We still paid $2.50 for our room and board, and $2.50 I put in the bank, I mean the post office, and $2.50 I could spend. Boy, I could dress then. It was great. Enjoyed it. And of course, after that, things got better. It kept raising up. I forgot what it was that he put in. He made to give us the $7.50. It used to be a name for that.
Well,
I worked in the shirt factory, block shirt factory, and I had 1 block to walk to block shirt factory from where I was living. So I didn't need a car. I didn't have one either. And we kept on going that way. We stayed there until they moved. They moved across town to on 3rd Street down to Greenfield Lake away. So then I had to move too, because we didn't have cars to ride in, and we had to have a place close enough to work that we could walk. But I did that for years. I had saved $250, and honey, I was rich in the post office.
you didn't send any money home?
uh,
You didn't send any money home?
one day, Papa come and see me.
Mm-hmm.
Now this was a catastrophe in my life. And
This was unannounced. You didn't
unannounced, yes. And I knew something was wrong, and the first thing I asked him what was wrong. And he said, I wanted to talk with you. Well, he had this truck, and he had paid payments on it, and he did not have the money to pay them, and he was going to lose his truck. So I marched down to the post office and take my $250 out and give it to him. And that was the beginning of my work, my working years.
How did you feel about giving him your savings?
Well, I didn't want to, but I didn't want him to lose his truck either. So I'd rather give it to him. But we children, all of us, after we got older and got out working, if he got in Dutch, we all helped him, every one of us, didn't we? And you too.
You did.
He went to the, what do you call that?
CC camp?
CCC camp, and David did too, and sent the money home to him. Then he began to kind of move out to where you could go buy him a piece of farming machinery. And he loved that.
So the
farm.
family was, as they left home and worked, they sent money back.
Yeah, we've always took care of Mom and Papa, as long as they lived. We paid all the bills. I did most of the work when I was in my day, but the boys done most of the paying. It worked out all right.
So you felt like this was an honor to take care of your family, to send money back.
And I
Well,
still,
what-
till this day, I feel like it's family's fault, responsibility.
What really happened there was, I told back at the beginning about the barn burning, and the guy come into Southport and told us about the barn had burned.
I remember that just as plain.
Well, he wanted to rebuild a barn, and he didn't have the money to do it, and he hawked everything he had to get the money to the Federal Land Bank to build it. And it's been a hard thing to get paid back. Some years he couldn't even pay the interest, and he was always behind. And that truck, I remember it, but I didn't know
You didn't know that?
what happened. And I remember him trying to do everything he could to get the money to pay it, but I never know how he got it until she told the story then.
Was that
This
truck
is a-
important to the farm for him to make
It
money?
was the only transportation we had, and he used it to do various jobs.
He needed
In
it.
fact, one of the things he did, there was a family that wanted to move to Roanoke, Virginia, and he moved them, and he didn't even get the gas money for moving them. In other words, he moved them and paid the expense of the truck doing it,
Why did it happen like that?
because the man didn't have the money to pay him.
So he took on the job knowing that or not knowing that?
Yeah, the purpose. I mean, the agreement was that he would pay him, but after he got there, he couldn't do it.
So he lost money on this.
Oh yeah.
But it wasn't anything he started to do as gratitude. It was a business deal.
That was supposed to have been a business deal, right?
Was he an astute business person, or did he do things like this often? Or
Who's that?
your father?
Well, normally, anytime you felt like that you had a chance to make $1, you'd latch on to it. Sometimes you gain, just like he had a job one time to clear some land for a guy, and it was right there adjoining the Long Beach Road. And he went off and bought a Fordson tractor. One of those old jobs that had cleats on it, you know, and solid wheels on the front, and it had a big disc plow that sit between the front wheel and the rear wheel on the right side, and cleared that farm. But that man paid him for that. He was taking a chance doing it. He bought the tractor on the jawbone.
So money was something that it was hard to get by, so he did whatever he needed to do at any time.
That's
and sometimes it was
That's
pretty risky,
true.
like buying a tractor to clear land,
That's right.
That's
or
true.
taking off in a truck to Roanoke, Virginia.
He wasn't the only one. Everybody was caught holding the bag at those times.
And I think everybody that could helped the other fellow too.
Yeah, they did. I think so.
So just like when the banks went under, look how many people had money in the banks and lost it every bit.
And he lost his
Their
too.
life savings.
He lost money in the bank also.
Yeah. I don't believe he had all that much.
I don't know how much he had. I don't think he did either.
Who wants to talk about their first date? Judy, when is your first date?
I don't remember the first one.
Well, he didn't impress you very much, did he?
Nope, didn't impress me very much. 'Cause
Well,
I don't remember.
who was the first one that impressed you? Or has there been one?
Oh yeah, I was crazy about one time, but Daddy wouldn't have it.
Tell us about
He
him.
made sure that I didn't see him very long.
How did he do that?
Well, when you listen to your parents. Nowadays they don't want to listen, but then you listen. I think I went out with him one time, but Daddy told me not to. He found out about it. But I wasn't punished, but he sure made it clear that was a no-no. And I'm glad I listened, because the guy committed suicide about 10 years ago.
About 10 years ago.
About 10 years ago, he committed suicide right here.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How did you feel about that? I mean, you were really impressed with this guy.
Oh, I
this
was
could have
really,
been-
well, I was thankful by golly that I didn't marry him.
Oh, you think you would have done it anyway?
Well, he married a good friend of mine, and he drank real bad from what I understand. As when I knew him, he didn't, but he began to drink an awful lot, and my friend just could not live with him any longer. She had to leave, and when she left, it was a short time he committed suicide.
So that first date you went out without permission, what was that like? Obviously, you were determined to go out with this person. Where did you
Oh,
go?
yeah.
What did you do?
Went to the movies.
He's getting real serious.
Yeah, I wouldn't let him come to the house and pick me up. I just walked out and met him at the highway. At that time, we lived about a mile from the highway, and I met him at the highway, and we went to the movies at Southport, and I wouldn't let him carry me home. I got out at the road and I walked to the house, and he was sitting up waiting for me. He knew I'd done something, but I didn't lie to him. That's something you didn't do then. Well, I didn't lie to him. I'd tell him the truth, even though I knew I was going to get in trouble, but I didn't get in trouble. But
So
he
you-
made it clear that I was to stay away from him, so that was the end of it.
So you took a big chance and did
I took a
something you
big-
knew you shouldn't do.
Big chance,
And
yeah. He always treated me nice, but I thank the Lord I didn't marry him.
did you expect your father to at some point select a person that might be appropriate for you? Or give you hints that a certain young man might be acceptable?
No, I've never known him to do that. Well, I tell you, I didn't date a whole lot either. I guess what you would have called dating a lot of time was going to church with the guy or coming over to the house just to be around the house with you. And there wasn't a lot of traveling up until I guess I was about 20. When I become 20, I began to get out and go to the movies, go to the beach. And
So the word dating wasn't necessarily used.
no, it was never called dating, not that I know of.
How would something be referred to? Wait a minute.
Boy, that's kind of hard. I'll tell you, you
Maybe
just
my
wasn't supposed
question's
to be caught
inappropriate.
with anybody. If they didn't want you with them, then you just didn't do it.
I'll tell you about my first date, and you know I'd forgotten it until she started to talk. I said, so you remind me of it. First date I ever had, I was spending the nights with a cousin of mine's wife. He was a Coast Guard, and he was over in Fort Castle. And there was another Coast Guard over there. He was tall and lanky.
Handsome.
Huh?
And handsome, I bet.
No, he wasn't so handsome, but then he was a good man. And he come from over at the islands, over past the
Cedar Island.
Cedar Island. Yep. Do you remember him?
Connie up?
Yeah, that's who it was. And so he went to Charlotte and bought a car. And he wasn't used to driving it, you know. But anyway, he asked me to go to the movies that night with him. And he was over on the
Telephone there.
beach, down here, across there where they are, Castle.
Long Beach.
Long
Fort
Beach.
Castle.
That's where they were, the Coast Guards was. And I told him, yes, I'd go with him. I'd go with him just riding his car. That was something new. And so he came that night to get me. And I went. But through some angle, Sister happened to come up. While the time before we got going, she come. I don't remember how she got there or anything about it, but she did come up to the house. And so I told him that my sister was there and I couldn't leave her. He said, well, she can go. So we got in the car and started. And he sat way up in the car like this, tall, and he got over the wheel and he was nervous. And he rode all the way to Southport, up and down like this. And she and I got so tickled that I thought we was going to bust right there. But it was his nerves. He was just nervous. I bet he had never been out with anybody.
And he had two
And he had two women in the car and a new car, and he wasn't used to driving the car. But we got down there and we got in the movies and saw the movies.
So
And
your first date was actually with your older sister.
well, she was with me. But then a lot of the times when she was a dating, I had to go with her too. I don't know anything about her and Papa together, but my daddy didn't know anything about me, so I was free. And but I used to go a lot with people that Moody, his daddy, would bring over there at the house when they were dating. And that's one thing that's just always didn't ever like. And I had nothing to do with it.
So you had to go on your older sister's dates with
So
her.
she could go out and get away from home, because Papa wouldn't allow he was strong. He was and another thing, if anybody ever come to the house with a drink on them, they better head out before they ever get to the door.
So the idea was that the two of you together would keep anything from going wrong.
Well, yeah, as long as we were together, he would let us go. It's a story. But till as long as she lived, she held it against me. And I couldn't do nothing about
Well,
it.
it's really not fair.
Well, it was not fair, but I couldn't help it.
I know that was Daddy. That was Daddy for
They
it.
brought the people over to the house
Yeah.
and expected me to go, and if I didn't like them, it's all right, you got to go. If you
I'm
like
glad
'em,
I
not
didn't
like
have
'em.
no sister.
This gentleman had a new car to take his ladies out. What did you have on your first date?
If they couldn't walk, they couldn't go.
Tell us
Come on,
about
Hazel,
the-
listen up.
Well,
Tell us
you're in
about the
bad
first
shape
date
if you can't
that you
walk.
remember.
You don't want them no way.
I didn't have no dates.
So what I ever
Hazel was the first girl I guess I ever got serious with,
And that's after he got away from home.
and I know one time I don't recall how young I was, but Papa told me not to go to the beach, and they had dances at Long Beach, and I got a chance to go, and I went anyhow. Well, the next morning, he come up to my room. I slept upstairs, and looked in my shoe, and he found beach sand in it. That was one of the hardest whippings I ever got.
Well, that wasn't fair.
I don't understand. He was harsh with some and some he wasn't.
And
I don't understand that.
and as time went on, I guess, and I left home, I was just so ignorant. I didn't know what to even say to a girl. I didn't know where to wink at her or not.
Well, you had 4 sisters.
I never learned nothing from them.
They didn't know nothing.
And I recall one time after I left home, I was working in Danville, Virginia, and we was living at staying at a boarding house, and there was a lot of girls there. And one Sunday afternoon, one girl asked me to come on and go with them to eat. Well, I went along, and during the time she said, "This is Dutch." And I didn't know what the devil she meant. And but whenever we got through eating, I went ahead and paid the bill. She says, "I thought you said this was Dutch." Well, that come to me then what she mentioned it. And then as I first went to work there, I was answering the telephone. I'd never seen a telephone before. And after the first call came in, I answered it, and my boss, I was hoping I'd be there by myself whenever I first started getting calls. And he said, he called me Joe. He says, Joe, he says, you can get the country out of the boy, but you can't get the boy out of the country. You can get the boy out of the country, can't get the country out of the boy, can you? So I knew it. I look awkward answering the phone, you know. And then I went on and went out on the West Coast. And got tired of that. Came back south and landed in Alabama.
And all this time, you didn't have dates? You didn't invite some lady for Pepsi Cola or something?
I was afraid of them gals out in California.
Someone get this lady out of here.
So I would come back to Alabama and I started working Southern Airways. And
that's when you...
I met Sahu over there.
He's referring to his present wife.
And we seemed to hit it pretty good. We didn't slow down. We were married and still staying together.
So what? Tell us about that first date with her.
She told him a few times.
What?
I believe we were. I had a date with her or something or other.
You do remember asking her for a date?
After we got out of work, I was supposed to have a date with her. She didn't hang around. She went on and got in the car. And before she got away, I called her and asked her if she wasn't gonna fill that date. Well, she didn't act like she wanted to. So.
Sounds like you didn't impress her too much.
No, I think she's playing hard to get.
I guess must have been about 5 or 6 years old. Daddy had radio as far back as I can remember, and we used to look, on Saturday nights was our special night. We liked what come on Saturday nights, and Grand Ole Opry and Amos and Andy. That was our specials.
This was Saturday nights.
Oh yeah, and we enjoyed that the most.
Did you have a choice of what to listen to? Were there other things
Well, this is what we liked. It wasn't a whole lot to listen to, but Amos and Andy was funny, and the Grand Ole Opry, we loved the singing. So that's our main stations.
Did you listen to the radio every night, or was it just certain times? Or?
No, mostly Saturday night was the best. We just liked the Grand Ole Opry and Amos and Andy, and that come on Saturday night.
So a lot of the programming didn't interest you?
No, Daddy liked...
The world news? Or?
Yeah, Daddy liked that. At night, mostly, I can remember in the summertime sitting on the porch after dark. We'd build a little smoke to keep the mosquitoes away and just sit out there until everybody was ready to go to bed, and then we'd go to bed.
I believe I had seen a radio before, but the first one we ever had, Dave had wrote and said he was going to bring us one, and we would need a good antenna. And he told Papa to get a good pole to put an antenna wire to. Well, he and I went into the woods and we found some cypress, and they were real tall, carried the log cart, and we cut down 2 poles and brought them back. And then I was wondering how we was going to get them things set up there, you know. But one day we got out and dug the hole to put it in, and got the butt of it in the hole, and then we got the mules with a long chain to help us lift it up, straight up. And we finally got those poles mounted with a wire between them and a wire coming down. And then he brought the radio home. It was a airless or airline or something other. And it was a battery outfit. We didn't have power at that time. And there wasn't all that much listening to it, I don't think. It seemed like
Too busy.
It was just occasionally we'd get to listen to it. And I believe that's the extent of the radio. I remember Joe Louis and Max Mellon fighting, and got that on radio. And then I believe it was about 1936, there was a repeat with Joe Louis and Max Mellon, and Joe Louis beat Max Mellon this time. And I didn't even get to hear that, but I was a little late getting there, and Joe knocked him out in the first round.
Did you have neighbors or people that didn't have radios that would come to your house to listen?
Yeah, there was someone in the neighborhood who had one before we did, and occasionally we would go over there and on Saturday night and listen to Grand Ole Opry. Minnie Pearl, she built they built a new hospital there in Nashville, and she financed a whole floor. It's a cancer floor, and Doug was in that on that floor for every time he went to Nashville to hospital, he was on that floor.
Well, the only thing I remember is where I was rooming and boarding, they had a radio, and the neighbors would come over, and we'd sit and listen to the Grand Ole Opry on Saturday night, and that's about the only time we ever listened to it. And that's all I remember about it. I don't know when I ever bought one or had one or anything.
But let me tell you an occasion about me. After I started the school out there at the little small one-room building out there near Roger Swain's, and then Verner and Dave, probably Cleo too, they had got as far as they could go, which was the 7th grade, so they had to go to Southport. And they commuted backwards and forwards in a truck for a long, long while. And so it got so expensive until it was cheaper for us to move to Southport and stay down there. And Papa would come down on the weekends. And that's when the man came down to notify us that the barn had burned. Well, I wasn't familiar with those commodes. That was something new to me. And I couldn't force myself to sit down on one. So I squatted down on it. And the old janitor caught me and carried me to the teacher. And she made me sit in a whole period, play period, for squatting down on that commode.
And this was you were in high school this time.
No, I was still in the first grade.
Oh, still in the first grade.
Yeah. Ms. Norman.
That was a mean old mean sister like to beat her.
But at your home, you had an outhouse. You didn't have a toilet.
Now I think this outhouse come later.
It did.
It wasn't during those days.
I think I'd already left home when it come.
And that toilet tissue was seriously but catalog.
Yeah,
So you didn't have an outhouse until...
it was a long time.
Well, what did
When
you
I
do?
was at
We
home,
went to the
did.
woods. We went to the woods. Well, good gracious, that corn cobs was the favorite item then in the woods. And
The Susan
I-
Roebuck was in the
I-
building.
So corn cobs were before the Susan Roebuck catalog.
Yeah.
yeah,
Where
it
did you
did
have
a
these?
much better job.
So where did you keep these corn cobs?
Well, we always saved our cobs when we shell corn,
Okay.
and
They're right next to the back door, perhaps.
we'd always place them where we could use them.
So when do you remember the first outhouse being built, or do you remember that?
I'd left home. I don't know.
And I had two, but
And
it
Judy,
was during her
maybe you
time.
remember the first outhouse being built.
I don't remember just when it was built, but I was way on up in age whenever we had our. I imagine probably about 10 or 12, and we always carried our old catalogs to the outhouse, and that was our toilet tissue. And we'd sit there and wish.
So you,
Uncle John, what was it like going to the woods in the middle of winter then?
It was rough. I'll tell you what, you cut it short. It's
You
raining.
didn't go very far either.
It was raining. You made it as quick as you could.
so
Well,
going
you
to school using those bathrooms, that was something special.
Boy, that was something I wasn't used to. That was sort of like a telephone. I never used one of them things before.
But you know, I was 18 years old, and I don't remember one thing about any of it. I undoubtedly blocked the whole thing out. But I thought it was the most ridiculous thing when I got older. I couldn't think that we ever had I don't remember ever going in at all. The woods or anywhere else.
But it may have happened like this. WPA, they had a project. I think it built them for people.
And that was
That might have been how we got one. I don't know.
that was Roosevelt's time too, wasn't it?
Yeah, they had instruction sheets too. Tell you exactly how to construct it.
That's right. How to build it. Hmm.
So perhaps that happened. That's how you got your first.
We don't know the carpenter that did
But
it.
now, we wasn't the only one in that shape.
There wasn't anybody down that way.
Probably every family was in the same boat.
Yeah, we were well off, really, compared with a lot.
So, being well off, would you consider yourself content, happy?
Well, we
Yeah,
didn't
is
know no
anybody
better.
No
else?
difference.
Yeah,
It's like this. If you don't know no better,
you don't worry about it.
it doesn't bother you.
While you were there growing up on the farm, what was some of your happiest times, Aunt Judy?
Well,
Christmas.
Christmas?
Christmas, of course, was the very best.
Uncle John?
I think one of the times that we kids enjoyed the most was whenever Vernon and Cleo would come home. They'd always bring us a piece of candy. So they'd come home, not every week, but a lot of times they'd come home every other week. So.
Uh-huh. The mother?
But honey, I think the most fun I ever remember is coming right down here.
Me too. I loved it. Down
This
here.
was a great, wonderful trip.
House Point.
The house over there that we had dinner in, I don't know where it was built from this other, but yeah, they had that here. You could either sleep out in what you brought to sleep in, or you could go in that house make you a pallet and sleep there. I don't know anybody would lay down and
So
sleep
that was
anywhere.
a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
That,
Uncle John, was that some of the most fun that you recall? Coming down here?
well, I don't know whether it's fun or not.
We
But
could
that-
go swimming.
That was built for the Boy Scout, and they used it for a while. And Hazel came along, and they moved it off its foundations, and they put it back up on blocks. But one time, we boys, every time we get a chance, we'd always come down. And we came down one weekend, and the sandflies was just about to eat us up. And they'd get in your hair, and boy, it'd drive you crazy. And there was a little boy with us by the name of Harley. And he found a a canvas or a tarp or something, and it was his idea. And there was the landing was around there, and there was a spring there, and we'd taken that tarp, and he and I finally got that thing on top of that tree. You know, the wind, it was just, the boughs was real close together, the wind had blowed it, and it was just in uniform, and we threw that tarp over the top of it, tied it down, then we crawled on top of it and went to sleep. Sandflies didn't bother us up there.
You went to sleep on top of a tree?
That's right.
Well, the wind could hit you up there and keep the sandflies blow it away.
Luckily, it didn't blow you off.
Well, the wind wasn't blowing all that much, I don't think.
If
Sandflies
the
is
wind
not so
blows,
bad
it
if the
wasn't
wind
bad.
blows, but it was sort of a still night.
So you had lots of fun down here, even with the sandflies.
Yeah.
Oh my land! I went
We'd go
fishing
across the
one
river.
night.
This and go to the beach and swim and play with the turtles and hunt turtle eggs and that was in June, moonlight.
What were some of the saddest times you experienced while you're living on the farm?
Dave threw a piece of cement at one of the cows and killed it.
That's pretty sad, huh?
Oh, it brought attention. I think it was a special cow or something.
Throw a piece of cement at a cow. Why on earth would he do that?
He was trying to pin it, and he didn't want to go do like he wanted it to, and he picked that. The old barn had burnt, and it had a cement floor in it, and there's a piece of cement laying around there from that floor, and he picked it up and threw it at the cow, and hit it right behind the butt there and killed it dead.
So that was a pretty sad time.
They was taking on with it, yeah.
Well, my worst part was being left down on Long Beach, but that's too long to tell. I think it's 10
Well,
minutes to 6 o'clock.
One time, Doddridge Clemens wanted me to go fishing with him, flounder. And that was before gas lanterns. And we would take a rim off of a wheel, a cart, and fashion it, and then take wire and kind of make a net in it so where we could put our lightwood in it and build a fire and lay it across the boat so we could see how to fish. And we started out about sundown, and that next morning we come in about sunrise, and the sandflies like to eat me up. And
Sandflies has always been after you, I guess.
man, you don't know nothing what they're compared to today and what they were then. And when we got back to the shore, I was so sick and hungry, and there was a colored guy standing on the shore there. His name was Ed Kramer. And he got down and he peeped at me and looked, and he says, "What nigger is you?" I was smoked black from that black smoke in that pan, you see.
I don't remember the cow the saddest time I ever remember. It's the day that John left town. And I don't even want to talk about it. This John right here.
Well, it upset us all.
It tore us all up. Yeah. That was
He'd
the
never
worst
seen
day
a
I
telephone.
ever
He was
remember
going
even
off to answer the
having.
telephone to
think.
get messages and things.
So
He'd
this was
never seen any
unexpected.
of
He
it.
just all of a sudden left.
But
No,
Dave
there was more
called
to
him
it.
and told him that he had a job for him.
No, that ain't what I'm talking about, though. You know when he went to your house?
Oh yes, oh yes,
That
oh yes.
was
I'm
what I'm
sorry.
talking about.
Right. That's so bad. I don't think I'd even tell him.
That's the reason I didn't
Well,
want to tell it.
it got. Everybody was working hard, and everybody was tired, and everybody was was wanting to call it a day, and we still had work to do. We didn't have our backer completed in, and everybody was restless and everything, and Papa said something to someone. I don't remember.
Mama wanted to go to church to the homecoming next day. And you took up for Mama. But
I don't know.
he didn't want, he wanted us to keep on working, and I can understand that, because you lose your tobacco, you don't have it.
This was on a Saturday night.
On
so-
Saturday during the day, and next day was a homecoming at church, and Mama wanted to quit early and get her cook for the next day, you know. Daddy didn't want to. He wanted to complete it. That's understandable. And John took up for Mama, and Daddy, he lashed back at John and ended up running him off. And that was the saddest time I ever remembered. To me, that was sad.
It looked like it was going to get. He looked like he was sort of tore up. And I just taken off
He
and
just
kept
lived.
going.
He just lived.
You go by the house and pack anything up?
Nah.
He went to stay with Cleo. Went to school
He
with
come to
Cleo.
my house. When I come home from work, he was sitting on the front steps, and I knew
This
something
was
bad
when
was
you
wrong.
you were working at the block shirt factory?
Yeah. And he stayed with us.
Yeah, I went. I stepped through went to school, I believe it, the last year.
So you never went back?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, went
Yes,
back
sir, but under the conditions, my daddy had to come and get him. He had to apologize. Isn't that right?
home. I guess that's the subject. I mean,
That sounds like a pretty sad story. Had a good ending though. You came back. You went back.
well,
Well, you always make
There's-
peace if you can.
So, was the family
Everything
generally
turned
happy?
out
I mean,
okay.
No. We
No,
were
they-
none happy.
No, none of them was happy, I don't think.
So it was a hard,
And
unhappy
Mama
life.
wasn't either. Can you imagine your own son? He went in the house to get the gun. I don't know where he got it or
Well-
not, but then John could outrun him anyway.
He went in the house to get the gun.
Oh, listen, this story that you have told, I have never heard.
What?
That is nothing in the world like I heard,
What?
so I ain't gonna say nothing else about none of it. That might not have been true either.
Well, I was there handing tobacco, and that's the way I remember it. About going to church for homecoming the next day.
Well, I didn't get that part. It was not about Mama, it was about Henry.
Well, it could have been partly about Henry too. See, that's a long time ago. I just couldn't
Papa
stand
picked
the
up a
thoughts
big
that
old
John was
Tobacco
gone.
stick and started to beat on
Yeah, I
Henry,
believe
and-
that's right
And
too.
you pushed him back.
I believe that's right too. I don't know. It's been a long time
Man.
ago, and
So, looking back on the time you spent there, could you say they were happy times, or they were not necessarily happy times? They were hard.
No, I think it was really we had more good times than we did bad times. Just episodes that happens at a home with a daddy and a mama and family. It'll happen in
And
a lot
it
of
happens
people's
to
houses.
everybody.
It's not everybody. It's just.
oh, here's sort of the subject of a lot of the things. For instance, you take on a pet project, and you do the work yourself. You think you was gonna profit from it, but it always wound up in his hands. For instance,
He was.
we had about a bunch of cows I stayed behind all the time, and one of them was real old, and Papa told me to watch out for her. Said she was liable to get down. She was going to have a calf. Well, she went missing, and I told him about it, and he said, "Well, watch the buzzards." Well, we had an awful rain. It just rained and rained, and so one day I seen the buzzards, and I went to it, and I found just as I walked up, a little calf run off into the bay, and the cow was dead, and her bag was, a couple of others was under the water, and 2 was on top, and the 2 on top was limp, like the calf had been nursing, and the other 2 was real swollen. Well, I caught the little calf and carried it home and raised it on the bottle. Papa told me I could have it. Well, he carried a bunch of stock off to the sale. I never did get nothing out of my calf.
And he was good for that too.
He sort of felt this way about what's yours is mine.
I am a poor wayfaring stranger, a traveling through this world of woe. But there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go. I'm going there to see my Father. I'm going there no more to roam. I'm just a going over Jordan. I'm just a going over home. I know dark clouds will gather round me. I know my way is rough and steep, but golden fields lie out before me, where God's redeemed no more shall weep. I'm going there to see my mother. She said she'd meet me when I come. I'm just a going over Jordan. I'm just a going over home. I'll soon be free from every trial. My body sleep in the old churchyard. I'll drop the cross of self-denial and enter on my great reward. I'm going there to see my Savior, to sing His praise forevermore. I'm just a going over Jordan. I'm just a going